Wake the fuck up. It's time to talk business. Jared Taylor, Matt Best, and Evan Hafer proudly present Blackhearted. Sponsored by BlackRifle Coffee Company and Arson Wave.
Welcome to the show, Buck Sexton. How are you?
I'm great, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being on. You're one of the most distinguished guests in the history.
This is cool
of either podcast.
I really liked. I'm really interested to get into when you took over in Iraq, because I think we were there at the same time.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. You got a buddy on the show who's got the Iraq days.
I think you got there in 2005, correct?
I actually don't. You see, unfortunately, because I don't come from the mill side of things, I don't know what the regs are over there, but I don't really talk about it because it's agency and they get very get very snippy about things like that. So I was in Iraq, I was in Afghanistan. That's about usually the extent of what I can say on that stuff without possibly getting an angry phone call from the folks down in the DC area.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Buck. We just finished writing a book for Matt Best, who's also on the show. We just got notes back from the CIA for redactions. And what you can and cannot say about the CIA is pretty crazy.
They wouldn't let us say James Bond.
Yeah. They redacted.
Wait, they wouldn't let you say James Bond?
In the book, yeah, they redacted the phrase James Bond. And it was a sentence that just said, when you join, you don't get any cool gadgets. It's not like James Bond or anything. And they redacted the name James Bond.
That's why I think I'm glad that you've gone through the experience, or you know what I'm talking about, because I just try to avoid in any way annoying or upsetting those people. It's not an operational security issue in that, like, I know what legitimately can and cannot be talked about, but when you're talking about somebody who used to be in the Langley family, it's what it's insane what you can't say. I mean, I officially cleared that I'm CIA. I've officially cleared that I served in a couple of war zones. I've never been able to talk about any of the other countries I've served in or gone to, or nothing.
Yeah, and they redacted most of that as well in the book of even certain parts of Iraq, like, hey, so and so was in northern Iraq. Redaction. You can't use the word site, SITE. They redacted that. It was a pretty wild list of what you could and couldn't say.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I'm glad you guys know that I'm not trying to be cagey. I mean, it's like I worked for the CIA. I'm sure if they heard me making jokes about how I mostly just made lattes, they'd be like, well, maybe those were super secret squirrel lattes, Sexton. You should be
How'd you get started, Buck? How did you develop this online? I mean, you're syndicated in what, 100 cities?
I was really appreciative that we're pretty much almost the same age.
Yeah.
Like, that was cool.
Yeah, but it also makes you feel like a loser. Like, Buck is doing way more than us.
And he's also in much better shape than you are, JP.
Hey.
Well, let me first say that I really appreciate that BlackRifle is a sponsor on the show. I mean, this is at the stage where people are, it's like being an early investor, right? I mean, for a sponsor to come on at this stage, I mean, yeah, it's a proven product insofar as, as you mentioned, I'm on in over 100 stations, so I'm syndicated nationally. But I'm certainly not at the Hannity, Limbaugh, et cetera level of syndication quite yet. And so any company that comes along is like, look, we respect what you do. We like the show. We like the tone, and we think there's a partnership here. I mean, that really feels like it's like early stage investors. It's like somebody joining a member of the becoming a member of the family.
You have a good relationship. It's not an empty sponsor.
Exactly. And so it really does mean a lot to me when I say that on air too. And for anyone listening, these guys are. I'm telling my audience to put their money where their mouths are in terms of supporting veterans and a great company and a really cool brand, which is what you guys at BlackRifle have created. And also from a personal perspective on the radio side, you guys coming along and being willing to partner with me just shows that you also appreciate the content, the effort, and the point of view that I'm putting out there. So thank you for that. In terms of how I got started in this, I'm a weird case study of somebody who had like no interest in going into media whatsoever, or
Really?
no interest, but no plans whatsoever to go into the media business. I was an agency, which, as we know, that's about the extent of what I say. I was agency for a while, and making coffee, lots of paperwork, really crazy James Bond stuff. And then but I did some interesting stuff there, and I learned a lot, to be sure, and learned a lot about government. Anyway, I left there and went to the NYPD Intelligence Division, which does counterterrorism work here in New York City. That was really just because I wanted to go back to New York, quite honestly. I wish I could say there was a huge, brilliant plan behind this, other than, honestly, I wanted to be in New York because it's where my family was, it's where my friends were, and, I wanted to party up here. Quite frankly, I was in my late 20s, and I was like, you know what? New York is where the action is for me. D.C., too many dweebs running around saying, I work for Congressman so-and-so. I just got sick of it. So I decided that I was going to go up to New York, and I was up here, and I went through, and I think that this is something you guys talk about on the show. So I went through that whole process of trying to sell my government experience or my background to future employers. And it was humbling, man. Because what you get, especially when you say I'm a former CIA analyst, there are two things that come up. People are like, okay, that's cool. Tell me about it. And then you can't really tell them all that much because, as we've been discussing on the agency side, there's a lot of blocks for all that.
Yeah.
Real and crazy. And then you also get into, well, how does that translate into what I'm doing here? Guys, I sat in on so many, as soon as I sat down for so many interviews. I sat down with people from Wall Street and whatever, and it was always like, yeah, it's cool. We're glad that you did your whole counterterrorism thing at the agency. That's cool, but it's not really a skill set that we like or that we can use here. And I'm like, okay, what do you guys do? What would you say you do here? So, there was that, and that was a frustrating experience. So I actually ended up applying to grad school, and I'm sorry if this is turning into Buck Sexton's autobiography.
No, look, this is what we want to know.
I have to go into this before we get too deep because I have experienced exactly what he talked about just a minute ago. When Matt and I were in D.C. for the premiere of Range 15 last year, we went out one evening with Florent Groberg, Medal of Honor recipient, and he lives right downtown. And he took us to this bar right there, and it was a weekday. Right at 5:30, it flooded with just my nightmare. Guys in suits that took their suit jackets off and then just drank and I was like, God, listen to this. And you just hear, so then Senator so-and-so says this, and are you guys going to play golf this weekend? I'm like, I want a Molotov cocktail this place.
It's like that dinner scene from American Psycho where they all have their hair slicked back.
It's for me, in New York City, one, I'm from here, so I just have that huge bias, and my whole family's here, so, right, I'm automatically going to like it more than D.C., but in New York, for people who spend time here, if you're okay with the city, if you don't like cities, you're going to hate New York, right? But if you're okay with the city, you can kind of make this place what you want of it. There's very different neighborhoods, very different feels,
yep.
And it's so big and so much going on that you can kind of create your own life here. To your point about D.C., you're going to hear some dude be like, yeah, I work for Congressman so-and-so. There's no way around that, right? If you were out in the city, in the District of Columbia, proximity to government and connections to government power are the currency that people use, not just professionally, but also socially, and it just gets so annoying.
It's almost, because it's a subculture almost like Hollywood, but in a different sense. Whereas in Hollywood, everybody has this sense of power as they achieve, their rise through the ranks of.
Yeah, but everywhere you go, somebody's got a script. Yeah. Somebody's got a script. Somebody's got an idea. They're there for.
If I don't like you or I don't like what you say, my power is I'll make sure you don't work here. Well,
right.
The same thing in D.C. It's this altered sense of power of. If they get in an argument or they want to win it, it's okay. Well, you obviously don't know who I am.
Right.
Great, you work for Senator fucking Dickface.
Yeah, exactly. So you got out of there and you went to New York City. You went back to New York City, and then how did you come up with trying to get into radio and trying to break in?
So this is where things get kind of just really random and out of nowhere, and why I feel like, in a sense, it's helpful for people that want to make the government to private sector transition, but also it has definitely scared some people away, because what I did in retrospect was crazy. So I applied to business school, which I will say for the any mill folks, former mill folks or active or thinking about getting out listening, business schools love veterans. They love military experience. I was not a veteran, so I was kind of in this weird category of like, well, you kind of served your country, but I mean, you're not actually, a veteran. And so but if you are a veteran and you're ever thinking about that transition, unless someone's going to go the route of what you guys have done, start your own business right off the bat, getting an MBA is actually, I mean the top schools, they love, and all these veterans from these different veterans organizations within the business school community, I kind of tracked them down, and they were so, we talked and, we shared stories about all the stuff that, one does when you've been on, Uncle Sam's payroll for a while, and they were great, and they were really helpful in navigating that process. And so I applied to business school while I was at the NYPD Intelligence Division. And my whole thing was like, I'm out of government. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm donezo. And through that process, I actually ended up getting into a couple of great schools here in New York City, which is where I really wanted to be anyway. I got an email from somebody, because like I said, I had been out there like anyone who knows anyone. I mean, I was just pounding the pavement. Like, I want to, I'll go work and do private sector foreign policy analysis stuff, right? Or I hung out with guys on Wall Street. I sat on a trading desk, I remember. It was like a meeting through a friend of a friend, and this guy just kept looking at me like, you have no finance experience, you don't even know bond math, like, why am I even talking to you? And I was like, dude, I don't know. I mean, I'm here because someone told me to come here. I applied to B school, and I finally got in and was weeks away from going. And somebody said, I've got a friend that you should talk to. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I send an email out, and she's like, oh, well, I heard about you at a conference, and I'm starting this website, and I think you should come, you should come talk to me because maybe you'll want to write for us. And I'm like, well, I'm going to business school, so I'll be able to contribute when I'm in B school. Long story short, and then I'll stop and catch a breath here. It was the president of the Blaze, a woman named Betsy Morgan, and she had been picked by Glenn Beck, who had just left Fox to start his own thing, to run his website because she had been the CEO of the Huffington Post. And I sat down, and she's like, well, I know you have an intelligence background. What are your politics? And I'm like, well, I'm also really conservative. And she was like, what? And all of a sudden, that day in that room, she made me a job offer, and I decided not to go to business school, basically on the fly.
Wow. Because of the company and what they believed in, or did they say, hey, you're immediately going to go into radio? What was that? What was the conversation like?
I remember talking to them just about what the plans were for the Blaze, which is now based out of Dallas. It used to be based out of New York, and so this was Glenn Beck's company that was going to be, I don't think you'd say a competitor to Fox, because Fox makes like $2 billion a year, and that's
Sure.
quite a grandiose statement, but like an alternative conservative media entity, and initially had some really big ambitions. And they told me, like, look, you're going to have a lot of opportunities here to do different stuff. And Betsy, who then later became just the straight up CEO of the company, did a great job of selling me on it. She's like, you can work from home, try it for a year. And this is the other part of it too. She's like, if you don't like it, in a year I'll write you the best business school recs ever. And that one or two schools that you didn't get into, I'll help you get into them, right? So I'm like, okay.
Oh wow, that's a good deal.
Back to I just wanted to be in New York and give it a whirl. But I love media. I've been a Fox News, Drudge Report, just diving deep into all that stuff since early on in college, and honestly, probably in high school. So I figured, okay, I'll do a little writing for them, and they hired me as an associate editor for not very much money and no job security. But I figured, let's give this a whirl. And I had no journalism experience whatsoever, and I just kind of started out writing for them.
That's great. That's a crazy story.
Yeah.
Especially,
my parents were like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "I'm definitely not sure, but why not? Let's give it a shot."
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, to me, because I first learned about the Blaze, and I don't know if you guys are the same. Where online clips is where with Tommy Lahren. Those started burning up my Facebook, and that's where I initially found out about the Blaze. when did you first start there? Like start being an online personality, an on-air personality.
I was like one of the earliest, and then one of the longest surviving members of the Blaze from a talent perspective. They brought me on when they launched. I mean, I was there for the launch of GBTV, which then became the Blaze TV, and that was back in 2011.
Wow.
So they brought me on as a writer, and I was just another. There were like 30, and not a single writer from when I started, by the way, remains there. There were like 20 or 20-ish guys who were all different writers, and and I learned the business in the first 6 months or so, almost exclusively from the perspective of like, I'm a website writer. What are the metrics? What headlines do we use? Audience interaction with the comments and everything. So I got a really good sense for how that business goes, and I learned very quickly that in a clickbait infested universe, you need to create. You need to do more than just write if you want to be in this business, and as importantly as anything else, you also need to understand that you're very, very replaceable. So I was like, well, what else can I do? And that's when I kind of made this pivot into doing some of the TV at the Blaze, and then radio was actually the last thing I did.
Wow, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, because I see you're doing America Now, and that's it's 3 hours. That's a long time. That's not just an hour segment anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think what happened was that I started doing the TV at the Blaze, or it was GBTV at the time, and then they realized we probably shouldn't have a TV channel just named after Glenn. That's a little weird, so they changed it to the Blaze TV. And that was, I had a facility for that. I had done a lot of briefings, a lot of high-level briefings at the agency, and it's just I'm a reasonably talkative guy, and I also. Having a background where you actually kind of know stuff. I didn't have to play the journalist role of like, I'm just here to ask questions. Like, I actually knew some stuff, right? So we want to talk about how a terrorism investigation works. I'm like, well, I've done these before. So I don't have to sit here and be like, well, random guest that we booked, like, tell me some stuff. I'm like, I'll tell you some stuff, son. Like, sit down, So that was a really helpful early stage. And you're seeing that a lot more, by the way. I mean, I go over to Fox now, and there's SEALs, there's former Marines. I mean, you've always kind of had the old generals at CNN and these places that,
you had some time at CNN, though, didn't you?
I'm sorry?
Did you have some time at CNN?
I was at CNN for 2 years as an on-air contributor.
Did you like that?
Yeah, how was that environment?
Wow.
Yeah.
I still want to tell you how radio started, because that's an interesting little side note. But CNN, here's what I'd say about it. CNN is a place where if you're just looking to do one thing on TV as a conservative, that can be okay. Meaning if you want to do like national security analysis, or you're going to be a healthcare guy. But if you're going to be a generalist, you're just going to get ambushed. They're just going to put you on TV. I wish I had pulled, I still probably have them in my email, some of the requests that I would get. Like, they would never have me on to debate an issue and give me fair time and actually treat me respectfully. But I'd get emails or something that say, Dr. Ben Carson just said something strange about being in prison and being gay. Do you want to come on and defend that? I'm like, nah, I think I'm going to pass, guys. Thanks.
I have a divine hatred for Don Lemon.
Yeah, Jared, you'll never find a guy who hates Don Lemon more than Jared Taylor. By the way,
we're not even sure why at this point.
No, it's because anytime something like specific happens, he makes the dumbest statements like that a human could make. Like,
yeah,
it's just like, oh my God, why did anybody give you a stage? Unless that's the goal. Like,
yeah, I don't know.
The goal is let's get somebody to say the stupidest fucking thing.
Well, let me ask you, Buck. When the camera cuts at CNN and they go to commercial over there, is there a laughing, joking manner about what you're talking about? Do people genuinely get along, or not?
No. It depends. You guys brought up Don Lemon show. That's actually one I used to do over at CNN a fair amount. And I was on there. One of the better known CNN clips of me is I'm sitting there talking about the response. I forget which major terrorist attack in Europe it was, but it was one of those where we had a lot of casualties, and it was a mess. And I'm talking about what are the kinds of responses that European CT units are going to take, and also how this will affect cooperation. It's the same script for pretty much every one of these attacks, right? There's not that much differentiation. And then depending on the way somebody's politics fall, it's either, oh my gosh, like we have to worry about Islamophobia, or it's like maybe we should stop taking like 1 million migrants from war-torn Muslim countries without knowing who they are. I mean, that's the way that it always tends to go. I was on Don Lemon's show, and they had some woman on there who's Palestinian, and I know who she is, because her job is to just go on TV and call everybody like an Islamophobe and a racist, and has no particular expertise or background other than being kind of a socialite. And I'm talking, I'm like, yeah, look, this is what I think the CT services in France, it was a French attack, I forget which one, in France are going to do. And she's just like, well, you're not a Muslim, and you're not an Arabic speaker, and you don't know anything. And I'm kind of just like, okay. I was kind of like, I was so taken aback, because what I realized is that they brought her on to that show to attack me as a Republican white guy, even though I wasn't on the show to give a Republican white guy. I'm just talking about, like, this is how
the response.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the response. I'm not even making a politicized argument, and she just came at me because that was the way they had set up the segment. And I was like, okay, well, when I was in Afghanistan trying to stop people from lopping off people's heads, like, I don't know what you were doing, but, and it kind of sort of go down there. And they went to commercial, and then she kind of continued on with me, and I'm like, look at all these so-called CNN experts you have. None of them have even served in war zones. None of them speak Arabic. None of them know a damn thing. You're calling me out? I mean, it got hostile in the break. And I turned to Don. I'm like, this is BS. Like, she's going to attack credibility. This is nonsense. I want our chance to respond. And they were like, we will cut to commercial again, and you will be gone if you do that.
You're kidding me.
That just solidifies.
That's how it goes.
That
He's
just
like, no,
solidifies.
we're moving on. No, absolutely not. No. And it just is a classic example of, it's all staged over there, man. You're getting ambushed.
Yes.
And what I realized is that you actually can't win. Like, I figure I'm smarter and a better debater than 90% of the people that CNN has on to represent different liberal points of view, right?
Yeah.
And maybe 90% is generous, maybe it's not. But something like that in my mind. But it doesn't matter, because when they bring you on and they have a host who's also a Democrat and some other like yelly, shouty, usually person from like a protected status group among Democrats,
professionally
to also
offended.
jump in. It's 2-on-1, and what happens is, like the classic CNN setup for me would be like, okay, like, let's talk about, the latest in the election, and over here we have Democrat talking about Hillary Clinton. So tell me, Hillary's so wise, so smart, and so beautiful and talented. You are too, because you support her. What's that like? And the person gets to talk a little bit, and they go to me, they're like, Buck, we found this tweet from somebody under handle white supremacist evil baby killer 929, and he's saying something about how Trump is going to win. Are you a supporter of white supremacist 929 baby killer's ideas here? And you're just like, first of all, I mean, they've actually done this to me. I haven't even seen the tweet they're referencing. I don't even know what they're, and I have the emails, so they're like, we just want to have a discussion about where the polls stand, right? But it's a joke. It's a ruse. You're watching kabuki theater, right? It's all very stylized and staged. So I left after 2 years, and I'm just like, this is not. I don't need to be in a position where, I mean, one of my favorite moments was actually they asked about troop levels in Afghanistan, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, let's have this discussion. And they didn't really let me talk, and they went to Van Jones, and then before they let me respond to Van, who had taken shots at what I was saying, I was just like, well, I've actually been in the damn country. This guy doesn't know
Van Jones has never served
his elbow about this. And they like went to commercial right away, and I'm like, this is CNN. Like, hold on a second, Buck. Van is speaking on Afghanistan. I'm like, I guarantee you couldn't even name the three main ethnic religious groups in Afghanistan. Like, it's just nonsense, but that's what you deal with over there.
Yeah, and I think that's what the general public assumes, but actually hearing out of someone's mouth who's actually been on there confirms it, where it's just, because it seems that way as an audience watcher, like myself, where I'm like, man, there's got to be something else going on there behind the scenes. And then when you find like that gravitas piece where, they're going up to Van Jones asking him about the Trump-Russia thing and whether, he says it's a big nothing burger. Aren't they just following stories like that and just constantly hammering it home to get their point across with CNN and Trump and Russia and everything?
Oh, of course. I mean, it's all, the whole thing is so politicized and so obvious. And I can tell you, for example, on the Hillary emails early on, they had me on a few times, and it was kind of a breaking news story. People were still getting it all figured out. And I was like, look, I had a security clearance. I got to tell you, if you're sending emails that have classified information in them over and over again, this would be a huge problem. This is illegal. This is not something. And they were like, "Oh, that's just your opinion." And
no,
I think
that's
you're going
a law.
ahead of the
No,
facts.
it's definitely
Everything that I
on the
said,
documentation you sign when you get your clearance. It's
Yeah.
definitely on there.
yeah. But everything that I said early on was 100% true, 100% accurate. And what I realized is that the more that I was hammering this, and the more that I was right, the less I would get booked on that topic, because they're like, "Well, we don't," because they're going to put up like, some journalist from the Daily Kos or Talking Points memo or wherever, who's never held a clearance, doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, and then me, and I'm going to win, and that's not part of the agenda. So, and there were a couple of people who were straight up ducking me, meaning they would set me up, because the way it is the bookers will set it up, and then a senior person for the show will review, and they would set me up against one of their protected Democrats, because there are some over there that are like revered, right? Like, oh, this person's so amazing.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I get a call, "Oh no, that person can't do it, so we're going to cancel the segment." I'm like, "You mean that person realized that they were in for a book whooping, right? Like that's what's going to happen," and they ducked because they're smart. And that happened all the time, but you never hear about that.
No, of course not. That would definitely not fit into the CNN's power over there of their hosts are the smartest.
Dude, I just can't wait for the headlines. Don Lemon falls off a ladder, loses leg.
Man, Jared's Don Lemon hatred goes to a deep level.
Yeah, it's
I think
I will
it's
tell you, he was nicer to me. He was nicer to me than most of the other hosts over there. There were a few that flatly refused to have me on their shows. Flatly refused.
Who were they, if you can name them?
I can't, because the only way I know about the flat refusal is people on their staff telling me, and they can get in trouble.
Gotcha.
I think mine started with when Don rebutted a statement that the sheriff of Detroit, or the chief of police of Detroit or Chicago, you know what I'm talking about, the black guy that always comes on and makes a big
Clark.
statement. Yes.
Yeah.
That's Milwaukee, right? Or was it?
Is it?
Milwaukee.
Yes,
Sheriff
Milwaukee.
David Clark.
So
He's gone
Sheriff
now.
Clark put out a very well-spoken statement on an incident, and Don just said the dumbest thing in the world. It's just like, you've never been in real life before, have you?
Yeah. It was basically, Don Lemon refuted as like an Uncle Tom type situation, and but I think that's all for ratings too, wouldn't you say, Buck? Like they bring all these people on, knowing that they're going to purposely tear them down, and especially in protest that are like, all right, cool, this is going to be a hot button issue. You're going to get some ratings out of this. That's got to be what's going on, obviously, right?
Look, the issues, whenever they can tell a story about racism on any of these networks, whatever it may be, they consider it a big ratings driver, and they're usually right to the degree that it couldn't be any more obvious what stories they're interested in telling and what stories they're not, based upon the race of the assailant or the race of the police officer who may be involved, whatever it is. I mean, I remember seeing the live stream out of Ferguson where there's like whole buildings are on fire. It's nighttime. You can see, they're literally burning down parts of that city. And they're like, well, it was a mostly peaceful protest going on here. And you're like, mostly peaceful. Like, wow, that's quite a way to describe it.
And that's what those lower thirds say, where it's just like whoever writes those lower thirds for CNN, boy, it's got to be a team that just sits there and thinks of like, how can we spin this at the bottom?
I think it's probably a comedy writer.
Yeah.
It's probably
I've actually always been a little bit more okay with, and then from the beginning, I did MSNBC a few times, and they had me on once against Glenn Greenwald on jihadism. And it was early in my TV career, but I still know more about it than he does. And that came across. And, because he pulled the usual, like, U.S. foreign policy creates Islamic terrorism, right? That was his. And he went so far as to be like, well, Buck worked for the CIA, so he should know, like, the CIA creates Islamic terrorism or something. And I remember responding along the lines of, right, that's why you have people all in countries all over the world having problems with Islamic terrorism because of U.S. foreign policy, right? This is why you have Pakistani terrorist groups going into India and killing as many polytheists as possible because of U.S. foreign.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Or the
it's such a
Tamil tigers or
stupid-
something. Yeah, that's really
Yeah,
dumb.
it's such a it's such a dumb point of view, but it gets a lot of play on the left. But that was my last time at MSNBC. But I got to say, at least with MSNBC, you're kind of like, all right. I mean, they're all going home wearing Che and Hammer and Sickle T-shirts, but we all know that, and there's a sort of honesty to it. So I'm a little more okay with that. I feel like a lot of the hosts at CNN are every bit as liberal as what you get at MSNBC, and the coverage and the stories are every bit as liberal, but you don't have the same degree of upfront, honesty about it. So
Sure.
that's where I think it can be a problem, and that's why Trump going after them for being fake news and all that stuff has resonated so much, because people see it and they're like, yeah.
It's really funny.
I mean, do any of you think that any of the major anchors there voted for Trump? A single one of them?
No,
I mean,
not one.
I bet whatever money somebody wanted to bet that you wouldn't get Anderson Cooper or Wolf Blitzer to come out and be like, yeah, I voted for Trump.
Yeah, not in 1 million years would they. And by the way, speaking of Trump, where were you election night? Because I think everybody has the same shocked story and can remember exactly where they were when Trump won. Where were you that night?
I was at home in New York City because the Blaze didn't bring me to Dallas. And they thought it was going to be over and that Hillary was going to win, as everyone did. And I remember being at home, and when Trump won Florida, I actually had a home radio rig set up, and I was able to get on and say, hey, guys, he's going to win. I popped into an ongoing live stream on radio for the Blaze Radio, and I'm like, guys, he's going to win. And it hit me, and I walked around New York City. That night, I remember, there was a shock, as in, like, I'm like, no way that just happened. But then walking around New York the next day where I live, it was, and I don't mean to, I'm not comparing the events, but in terms of the energy on the street, it was similar to Hurricane Sandy, meaning that there were just people walking around in this zombie state of like, oh my God, like what have I been through? And the city was in mourning. I mean, the city of New York was in mourning because Trump had won, and you could feel it, you could see it. It was crazy.
I was there. Matt and I were there, and he had never been.
You have a funny story about the hotels there, right?
Oh yeah. We had so Matt and I were there. We had sold this book based on Matt's life to Penguin, and we were there to meet all the executives. It's exactly like you described. Everybody in the city was very zombie-like, kind of walking around. All the hotels were sold out because they were going there to celebrate Hillary's victory. So we had a really hard time getting a hotel. No one thought, obviously, that Trump was going to win. So everybody was getting ready for that glass ceiling party over there. And then there was protests in the streets later on that night. Did you go live during all of that stuff as well?
Oh yeah, I was actually, when I went to one of those protests because it was so close to my apartment and people were yelling "Not my president" and all that stuff. I remember that very well, and I remember also wanting to tell them, like, well, technically, guys, technically speaking, you don't actually get to
your
decide
president.
this.
Yeah,
he kind of is your president. I remember also being so annoyed with myself the next day because it just didn't occur to me when the news was coming in that I was a 10-minute cab ride away from the straight up Hillary victory party where everyone had already assembled to celebrate the victory. They were already there, champagne ready to go. They're going to have a fireworks show, which they actually canceled the day before. And I'm like, this was my best opportunity in life to go do a straight up cannonball into a vat of liberal tears, and I missed it. So I was very annoyed with myself.
Well, to your credit though, it was really late because we did a show. We went on air literally the second they announced Trump had won. We did a show on air, and I want to say, because we had a lot of drinks that night, and we were celebrating, and I want to say it was just after 2 a.m. or like 1:30 a.m. somewhere in that neighborhood. So you going over there that late, I don't. Boy, it could have been vicious for you. It could have been vicious.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, and also there's always that slight possibility that somebody, from an elliptical machine from a gym here in New York City might recognize me from being chironed as like evil Trump supporter over at CNN, and that might have gotten a little awkward. So,
Dude, the reaction videos of that night alone will live forever.
They're
amazing.
I still watch them like they're Michael Jordan highlight tapes of the Bulls during the 90s. Yeah. Like occasionally I'll just pop on those liberal videos the day after that are all scored, especially the Rachel Maddow one, where she's like, "This is real. This is happening."
Yeah.
Like I'll just watch those like Jordan hitting that game winner in '99. You know.
Solid.
Yeah.
I just never get that emotional about politics. I can't imagine feeling that way about this. And it just, I was expecting that Hillary was going to win. And so when that didn't happen, I'm like, all right, well, let's see. But it wasn't like, oh, now, this is the dawning of a new era and Trump's going to fix all of our problems and everything's going to be awesome. It's like, I live in New York. I'm still paying way too much in taxes. The federal government still sucks.
Oh,
it's
God,
not going to be better tomorrow.
Chris
it's not going to be better in 5 years.
I hate him.
Chris Christie is in New Jersey, bro.
I know. I hate him, though.
Yeah, well, he didn't get on the plane, so he's not on the cabinet, apparently, after watching that Steve Bannon interview on 60 Minutes. That was the excuse for that. Let me ask you this. How do you think Trump's doing as a whole as a president right now?
There's a lot of the good stuff was front-loaded, the best being Hillary losing and then all the liberal tears we were talking about. So there was so much momentum with it. And I think the Gorsuch nomination to the Supreme Court, Gorsuch elevation to the Supreme Court was really important.
Yep.
The regulatory climate stuff is good. And just being able to talk about some of the stuff that Trump has been legitimately like a human battering ram on, whether we're talking about the media and just the culture wars that's happened in the country. So all that stuff's been good, but that's been there from the beginning. I'm not going to lie. Some of the more recent stuff has been... it's concerning to me. I mean, that Trump may go along with Pelosi and Schumer on an amnesty deal, that he went along on the budget, that he hasn't gotten any actual funding from a wall, and the repeal and replace of Obamacare, which who knows where that will be. I mean, I know the Senate's saying they've got something cooking, but it's early, right? So this is, I'd say it's early. I'd say so far, so far I'd probably give Trump a B+ based on my expectations, and I'm not going to give him an A. But maybe a B or a B+, which at this stage I think is decent. We'll have to see. Remember, Obamacare took 18 months, and before that, there wasn't a whole lot to speak of with that administration, whether you love it or hate it.
Well,
right?
he got a Nobel Peace Prize within like a month.
He did get a Nobel Peace Prize. That is true.
After being president for a month.
I was nominated.
Yeah. Jared was nominated
for jet ski skills.
For jet ski skills, and he wrote a children's book about terrorism, which was really nice, really well received. Let me ask you this: do you think Trump's relationship with Chuck and Nancy is as is it playing too close to the other side that you could possibly lose your base for the next election?
If he doesn't build a wall, if some of the key promises from the campaign are abandoned, now that's not delayed, right? If it's delayed, then the midterms might still be reasonably positive for the Republicans. But if by term 2 there's any reason to believe that he's abandoned the wall and that Trump has really changed and has taken a triangulation, taken the approach that Bill Clinton took of triangulation, then you're going to have a problem. I think that it is possible for him to go too close, but keep in mind, he's all along pushed some what are populist in Democrat and Republican positions, right? So he's been supportive of infrastructure spending, huge infrastructure spending, actually. They're looking at $1 trillion maybe of infrastructure spending. So that's not something, if you're a budget hawk, or if you think that the country printing all this money, running up all these deficits is going to be a problem, that doesn't make you happy. He also, on protectionism, that's where you get the Bernie Sanders Trump crossover. So that's been there from the beginning. So he can do that, and I don't think that his base is upset with him. I think that he loses the base, or he gets a problem, and he's like, you know what? Everything I said about the wall and deporting and getting the bad dudes or whatever he says out.
Hombres. The hombres out. Yeah.
Yeah, bad hombres. Thank you. It was bad hombres.
Yep.
That's
when
dudes
he
in
decides
Spanish.
that's no longer the case, then I think you're going to see real defections from his base. And also, if he ever really warms up to the media, because I mean, they don't want him to have a failed presidency. They want him in prison. They actually want him to go to jail.
Oh yeah, yeah. They want the whole kit and caboodle on that guy. Did you happen to check out Hillary's book by any chance?
It's so funny. I'm just talking about that tonight on radio. Buck Sexton with America Now, by the way. Available for all of you to listen on the iHeart app or on iTunes if you want to listen to the podcast.
Plug your heart out, Buck. Plug your heart out, buddy.
Yep.
You know what I mean, man? Hey,
absolutely.
And let me tell you, this morning I caught my beautiful girlfriend sneaking the last, I swear to God, true story, the last of my BlackRifle cold brew out of the fridge. She's like, sorry, late for work. I was like, what? So I'm making more, but she's on the BlackRifle coffee train now, too, and she's a little sneak because she stole the last of my BRC this morning. But, you know, I think, what was I talking about before? Oh, yes. Hillary's book.
Hillary's book, yeah. What happens?
Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, she's. Look, Hillary's a very interesting psychological study, right? At this point, what motivates her? At this point, what is there left for her to do? And the book is doing very well because I think people on both sides do want to see what her next act is, and that's what this is supposed to create.
Yeah,
right?
I read
narrative.
it. I read it, actually.
Oh, you read it? I literally just bought it on Kindle, so I was going to talk now about how I'm going to have a review for everybody, but how's it going?
Yeah, so look, I read the book, and to me, it was kind of a goodbye letter to politics. She went after so many people.
She just burned it.
She just burned it to the ground, and then she had one sentence towards the end that was like, you know, at the end of the day, I'm the candidate, and I really lost the election. It was like, all right, cool, but you spent 400 pages blaming everyone else, from Comey to I mean, she really goes after Bernie Sanders.
That part's really funny to me that she went so hard after Bernie because she and Watchman Schultz and Donna Brazile kind of conspired to keep him out of the DNC. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Donna Brazile, who still runs the DNC now, by the way, who gave her the town hall questions before the town hall.
Oh, yeah.
So, whatever.
Yeah, you're going to have a...
I got to tell you, you know, you asked, just going back to the CNN thing for a second, and hopefully no one from CNN is ever listening to this podcast.
No, they definitely don't.
I remember. Yeah, I'm not too worried about it. The Bernie Sanders era of the primary. I remember for whatever reason they brought me in. I guess they just needed a token Republican, and I sat on some panel. It was after one of the Bernie Hillary debates, and it was so fun because I got to sit there and be like, you know, Bernie is, you know, you guys should just embrace Bernie. He's the beating heart and soul of the Democrat Party right now. He is progressivism. He's got a real message. Hillary Clinton is a fake, a phony, a fraud, and we all know it, right? And you could see that there were all Hillary people pretty much that were on the panels because CNN was a Hillary network.
Yeah. Oh,
right? I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, so you had all Hillary, and when I say Hillary people, I mean these are people who have connections to the Clintons, who think they're going to work in a Clinton administration, who are going to have connectivity to the White House when Hillary wins. So, I mean, they are not going to go against Hillary, but they also don't want to lose the progressive viewers at home who are pro-Bernie people. So it's just so fun to make them a little uncomfortable by being like, so we know that like Bernie is the real deal and Hillary's a giant phony, right? They're like, well, they didn't know what to say.
Yeah, and my going forward, my thing with the DNC is like, hey, instead of protesting, instead of crying, instead of rigging all of these shows, why don't you come up with a candidate? Just figure out a good candidate who's going to run in 2020 and spend your energy on that versus the rest of the bullshit that is out there. And because right now, to me, they don't have a good candidate unless they're going to throw Bernie in there at the final seconds. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think Bernie is a little old for this game at this point.
So do I. But who do they have left? Is the question.
Well, they're gonna. You can see some of the, I think the early stage efforts.
Cory Booker's a guy.
They're going to have to convince Elizabeth Warren to give up her position as just being a progressive who gets to just parachute in whenever she wants, say whatever she wants, and is in a very safe state in Massachusetts. To put herself up for a possible run and all the scrutiny, everything that comes up. Because right now she just gets to be on like the top 10 most wonderful people in history list at like Bryn Mawr and Wellesley and Oberlin and all these places, right? So
right.
It's nice for her. I don't know if she's going to want to leave that to possibly lose to Donald Trump, right? That's a risk. The one person that I do see them really preparing would be Kamala Harris.
Yep.
Who's the senator from California?
Yeah.
That's the next They want to go back to having a female candidate, also a minority candidate. It's right out of the identity politics playbook. Elevate her, raise her up as the next great, hope of the Democrat Party, and see how that goes. That's what I think will happen.
And then some random white guy in his 60s that happens to be a congressman.
Yeah, exactly. And to your Kamala Harris points, I'm in the Hollywood circles, so I do a lot of films, I do a lot of books, and it's all of Hollywood is liberal. And I got an email from a gigantic producer. I'm not going to say who it is, but they're already prepping her with a luncheon. $500, take a picture, that type of thing. So they're trying to behind the scenes see if she's going to bring in the donations and if she's going to fit in with the Hollywood liberal side. So they're already going that route with her. And that on a previous show, that was my guess at who they were going to put on that pedestal. And I think you're right on that.
Yeah, no, and look, from their perspective, it does actually make a lot of sense. And the media is still one of the problems they've had with Trump is that he proved that they don't actually get to dictate as much as they used to, and that's upsetting to people who believe that journalism is the most important profession in the country, which I think most of the elite old school journalists or elitist old school journalists do believe. But they still do have a lot of ability to shape opinions. And look, they convinced more than half of the voting population of the country that Hillary Clinton was a good choice and was really smart and was really ethical and honorable, right? That's a pretty amazing feat when you think about what the reality of Hillary Clinton was.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
they still, I always look at it that way. People say, oh, it's so amazing Trump won. It is, but it's also kind of amazing that Hillary made it close, considering that under normal circumstances, a non-Clinton, she does have to take a charge for those emails and that whole thing, right? That is an indictment that anybody else would have to suffer under. And the fact that they bailed her out just goes to show you how powerful the machinery is.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. But to me, that Kamala Harris, she isn't likable. Did you watch those congressional hearings where she was asking questions, and she made it all about her, and it was like Comey and those guys might as well not even been there. It was like, hey, I'm about to run for president, and here's my time. Did it feel like that to you?
I think that with Harris, they're going to create a storyline around her, and they're going to make sure that they convince everybody who wants to be thought of as progressive and cool and with it that Kamala Harris is again the next great thing for the Democrat Party, regardless of what the reality is. Hillary Clinton is now, I think people will at least admit it, some Democrats will admit it, is a deficient politician. She's not someone who appeals to folks. She's not good at shaking hands and kissing babies and all that stuff. But they put her up there anyway, and she was breaking the glass ceiling. She had the experience, the golden resume, all this kind of stuff. They'll do the same thing with Harris, and I think they have a younger, more appealing candidate in Harris than they did in Clinton. And so, that gets them to 50% of the vote, basically, right? So it's just a question of that last, 1 or 2 percentage points that they need, and that's where they think that they can probably make it happen. But again, who knows, man? Trump, with the way things are going now, maybe Trump's going to be like, you know what, like Pence, she's a little too straight-laced for me, and he's not fun. So let's get somebody else in here. Maybe we'll bring in Kamala Harris. We'll have like a cross-party ticket. I'm just saying, it's the crazier things that happen given what I'm hearing these days.
Man, that would be, you want to talk about shocking the world. That would definitely shock the world.
You get Chuck Schumer saying that Trump likes him, right? This is a different, we're in a crazy universe right now.
Yeah, they caught him on a hot mic on C-SPAN the other day. I was shocked, and Chuck Schumer seemed stoked about it. Like the cool kid in school was telling the nerd, like, hey, man, we're actually buddies.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. It's a crazy world, man. I don't know what's going to happen. The good thing about political analysis now is that anyone who tells you what Trump is going to do, I don't care what their access is. I don't care if they're in the room with Trump 24 hours a day. They don't know, because Trump doesn't know, because it is evolving every day. So the good news is that everyone's opinions are kind of valid in a sense, because nobody knows. Yeah,
that's true. No one really knows day to day. To me, it's exciting. At least I wake up every day and I check Twitter, check Judge Report, and I don't know what I'm going to find there. So it makes every day exciting, at least.
Absolutely. And by the way, I never even told you guys on the radio side, if I could switch gears for a second, how that all happened.
Yeah.
Just for those who are wondering, they're like, how'd you get into radio? No one ever came to me and said, why don't you do radio? I just had listened to Rush and to Sean over a period of years, and so was familiar with talk radio and liked it. And I thought it would be worth giving a shot to. So I worked at the Blaze for 15 months. I did 6 days a week. So Monday through Friday, it was writing and TV. And then on Saturday, I did a 3-hour radio show for free on my own time, and managed to grow an audience with it and do well enough with it that they then moved me to their live stream during the week. And then I filled in for Glenn. That went well. Then Sean Hannity. That went well. Then Rush Limbaugh. And then Rush Limbaugh kept me as one of his fill-ins for his show whenever he was out for a few years. And then from there, Premiere, which is the company that syndicates Rush, picked me up and made me my own. I'm now a syndicated host on my own. But it's radio. I mean, you mentioned 3 hours. I can tell you that for me, at least in terms of energy and hours in, hours out, radio is the hardest by far. And TV is the easiest and the one that people are most overpaid for.
Yeah, because you can at least cut to commercials. Do you have commercials in your show at all?
Do I do commercials?
Yeah, no. Are commercials cut into your show, or is it just a straight 3 hours of you?
Oh no, there are commercials for sure. I mean,
look, at least
out.
That's what I was gonna say. So at least you have cutaways, like where I watch Joe Rogan go for 3.5 hours a day, and I'm like, man, is it the weed? How is he going that long every single day?
Wait, he goes 3.5 hours?
Yes. It looks sometimes longer.
Yeah, he will just power. Like, it's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. Like we're no commercial breaks, no nothing. So it's a straight 3.5 where there are no gaps, no nothing, and you're like, man, I didn't know if yours was the same, but that's it. Look, radio is a hard gig because again, you've got to keep people talking, you got to keep people interested, and sometimes these guests are like pulling teeth. I'm sure you've had that, right?
Yeah, I try to limit my guests as a result of that. I say that oftentimes guests are like babysitting, and some of the worst guests that you have are the ones who are just like, well, I'm a recognizable name, so people are just going to want to listen to me wax on about politics. And journalists, a lot of them have that attitude, believe it or not. And what's funny is that just because maybe you're a columnist for a reputable paper doesn't mean that you're good on radio. It doesn't mean that what you have to say is compelling. It doesn't mean you're good at keeping an audience's interest. So I limit the guests, and I find that also a nice thing about radio is that there's nowhere to hide. Look, on TV, if you're the nice way to the way to say it so that you don't get sued, right, is a compelling visual.
Sure.
But as you can imagine, there are lots of folks who are on TV because they're a more compelling visual, or the other code word way of saying it is good on TV, which is usually a way of saying that depending on whether you're male or female, that the folks of the opposite sex enjoy watching you on TV. In radio, you have none of that. It's just your content and it's your engagement with the audience. And I think that there's something really pure about that. And there's also, it's just harder to be a phony. I mean, you can't show up and do 3 hours of radio and not have done your homework and think that it's going to be okay. It's not. And if your audience is, my audience is full of crazy smart people. So they'll catch even little minor things, right? They're like, Buck, you're kind of mailing it into them, that last thing that you really, they're really on me about it. So I got to bring it every day. TV, it's like, oh yeah, bring on a guest. Look at like Morning Joe, right? The guy looks like he just blew in off the beach at Nantucket, He's just like, hey, like wearing like a pink sweater and like, hey, Mika, what's going on there? He's just hanging out, right? He's just hanging out, basically.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Well, listen, Buck, we appreciate you having you being on the show. Why don't you tell the audience where we can find all of your stuff?
Oh, fantastic! Thank you. The best way is if you're, I'm in 100 markets, but for those listening, I don't know if you're listening in a market where I currently have terrestrial radio, but you can go to bucksexton.com and there's a stream. You can just listen on the stream whenever you want. If you want to listen on demand, you go on iTunes and type in Buck Sexton with America Now, and you can subscribe to the podcast totally free. You will hear some phenomenal reads for a wonderful company known as BlackRifle Coffee. Which that's right. Those are the best. Or the iHeart app, which is an app that lets you listen to not just me, but radio stations all over the country. So the iHeart app is something on your smartphone that you can listen, and I'm 6 to 9 Eastern, and that's how you can listen. So
awesome.
There you go.
Awesome, Buck. And what about your social media? Do you have Instagram, Twitter, Facebook?
Oh, yeah. Buck Sexton on Instagram and Twitter, and Facebook.com/Buck Sexton on that one. So there you go.
Awesome, man. Hey, we greatly appreciate you being here. One of the most fascinating guests we've had. Ladies and gentlemen, Buck Sexton. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, guys. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Black Rifle Coffee Company, along with Arson Wave, would like to thank you for tuning in to Black-Hearted. Have a great fucking day.